Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Brienne of Tarth was born on an island that stood apart from the mainland, a green and windswept place where the sea was never quiet and storms arrived without warning. The Isle of Tarth lay at the edge of the narrow sea, its cliffs rising sharply from churning waters, its forest dense and bright against grey skies. Sailors called it the Sapphire Isle for the colour of its waters on clear days, though those days were rarer than the name suggested. It was a place shaped by isolation, endurance and weather, and it was there that Brienne first learned what it meant to stand alone. She was the only surviving child of Lord Selwyn Tarth, called the Evenstar, ruler of the island from Evenfall Hall. Brienne had been born after tragedy. Her mother died bringing her into the world, and the brothers who might have stood beside her did not live long enough to do so. From her earliest years, Brienne was an only child in a house that had expected heirs and sons, and that absence shaped her life before she ever understood it. Even as a girl, Brienne was different. She grew faster than other children, broader in the shoulders, taller by years before she should have been. Her limbs were strong and awkward, her face plain, her voice deeper than expected. Where other girls learned needlework and songs, Brienne struggled to sit still, her hands itching for motion. She bruised easily, scraped her knees, and returned from play with torn clothes and mud on her face. Servants whispered. Courtiers smiled tightly. Her father watched in silence, torn between affection and fear for what the world would do to a daughter like this. Lord Selwyn did not mistreat her. He loved her, and that love carried a quiet sadness. He wanted Brienne to be safe, to be accepted, to have a future that did not end in mockery or blood. He encouraged her to learn the duties of a lady, arranged for her to be taught manners and music, and later, when she was old enough, began to consider marriages. But the world did not meet him halfway. Brienne was mocked early and often. Other children laughed at her size and strength. Boys challenged her to contests meant as jokes and left angry when she bested them. Girls whispered behind hands and called her names she pretended not to hear. She learned quickly that kindness was conditional, that approval was fragile, and that admiration was rarely sincere. When Brienne was dressed in silks and sent to sit among other noble girls, she felt like an imposter. The dresses pinched and restricted her movements. She did not know how to smile just enough or laugh softly at jests she did not understand. She stood too straight, spoke too plainly, and looked people in the eye when custom suggested she should look away. Each lesson intended to make her acceptable only sharpened the sense that she was not. Suitors came, as they were expected to. Some came for her father's title, some for the island's wealth, some out of obligation rather than desire. Few stayed long. One mocked her openly, another fled, after she defeated him in a contest of strength meant to humiliate her. Each departure left another mark, another quiet confirmation of what Brienne had already begun to believe, that she was not meant for the role the world had prepared for her. It was during these years that Brienne first turned fully toward the sword. At first, it was curiosity. She watched knights train in the yard at Evenfall Hall, drawn to the rhythm of steel and the discipline of movement. The sword was honest in a way people were not. It did not flatter. It did not lie. It demanded effort, balance and endurance, and it rewarded them without judgment. When Brienne, asked to train. The request was met with confusion, then resistance. Knights laughed, masters hesitated, but Lord Selwyn, seeing the determination in his daughter's eyes, allowed it, cautiously at first, and then more fully as her persistence became impossible to ignore. Training was not kind to her, but it was fair. She was knocked down. She was bruised and bloodied. She was mocked openly by men who saw her presence as a joke, an insult, or a threat to tradition. Brienne learned to rise without complaint, to absorb blows and keep her footing, to fight through pain without letting it shape her expression. She learned that strength was not enough. She needed discipline, control, and patience. She needed to endure. The sword became more than a tool. It became a measure of worth she could trust. Brienne's father worried. He watched his daughter return from the yard exhausted and battered, armor dented and hands blistered. He feared what this path would bring her: danger, loneliness, a life spent proving herself to those who would never accept her. But he also saw something else, a quiet certainty settling into her movements, a confidence that did not depend on approval. For the first time, Brienne was not trying to become someone else. Still, the world beyond Tarth waited, and it was less forgiving than the island had been. As Brienne grew older, her reputation travelled ahead of her. Whispers followed her name: the maid who fought like a man, the freak of Tarth, the woman who thought herself a knight. Some laughed, others were offended. Very few were curious. Brienne learned the stories of knights not as songs, but as ideals. She listened to tales of Sir Galadon of Morn, the perfect knight of Tarth's own legends, who wielded a magic blade and never broke his vows. She absorbed the vows of knighthood with reverence, though she knew she could never swear them herself. She could not be a knight. The world had made that clear. But she could live as closely to those ideals as it would allow. Honor, loyalty, protection of the innocent. These were not abstract concepts to her. They were anchors. By the time Brienne reached adulthood, she no longer questioned what she was meant to be. The question was not whether the world would accept her, but whether she could endure its refusal. She trained harder. She rode farther. She learned to sleep in armor and eat without complaint. Each scar became proof that she belonged to herself, if nowhere else. The sea remained constant, crashing against Tarth's cliffs as it always had. Brienne often stood at its edge, looking outward, knowing that her path would eventually lead away from the island. Evenful Hall could not contain her forever. The wider world called, not with kindness, but with necessity. Brienne did not dream of glory. She did not dream of songs. What she wanted was simpler and more difficult: to be useful, to be true, and to live by a code that did not bend simply because others did. When she finally left Tarth, she did so without ceremony. Armor fastened carefully, sword at her side, resolve hard and quiet. Her father watched her go, knowing that he could not protect her from what lay ahead, and knowing also that she would never forgive herself if she stayed. The girl mocked for her size, and strength was gone. In her place stood a woman shaped by endurance, by loss, and by an unwavering belief in what should be, even when the world insisted otherwise. Brienne of Tarth stepped into that world not as a knight, but as something rarer, someone who believed in knighthood when others had abandoned it. And this was only the beginning. Brienne's first steps into the wider realm were not marked by triumph or recognition, but by silence and distance. The mainland did not welcome her with open arms. nor did it openly bar her way. Instead, it did what it would always do to Brienne of Tarth. It looked past her, laughed behind her back, or challenged her out of cruelty rather than respect. Inns went quiet when she entered. Men stared too long, their expressions sliding from curiosity to contempt. Others mistook her for a man and grew hostile when corrected. Brienne learned quickly that travelling alone meant constant vigilance. She endured it without complaint. Brienne took service where she could, guarding roads, escorting caravans, offering her sword to causes that claimed honour and paid honestly. She slept in stables and fields, ate what was given, and trained whenever time allowed. Every mile travelled hardened her resolve. Every insult sharpened her sense of purpose. She was not wandering aimlessly. She was testing herself against the world that had always doubted her. It was during these years that Brienne first encountered the great pageantry of Westerosi power, not as an honoured guest, but as an observer on the margins. She watched knights with polished armour and banners bright with colour boast loudly of victories they had not earned. She saw lords demand loyalty they did not deserve. Again and again she measured them against the ideals she carried, and again they fell short. Yet Brienne did not grow bitter, she grew clearer. The turning point came with the summons to Renly Baratheon's camp. Renly was everything Brienne was not. Charming, beloved, radiant with easy confidence. He was younger than his brothers, yet commanded devotion effortlessly. When Brienne arrived among his followers, she saw banners snapping in the wind, tents arranged in gleaming rows, and knights laughing freely beneath the green and gold of the Baratheon stag crowned in flowers. It was a vision of chivalry restored, or so it seemed. Brienne entered that world cautiously. She expected ridicule. She expected dismissal. Instead, she was offered something rare, a chance. When Renly announced a melee to choose the members of his Rainbow Guard, Brienne entered without expectation of victory. She did not seek glory. She sought the test. Knights laughed openly as she stepped into the ring, her armour plain, her presence unsettling. Some assumed it was a jest. Others assumed Renly had allowed her entry as a novelty. They were wrong. Brienne fought with discipline and restraint. She did not grandstand or taunt. She conserved her strength, endured blows meant to humiliate her, and struck back with precision rather than fury. One by one, knights fell. Laughter faded into shock. When the melee ended, Brienne of Tarth stood victorious over some of the most celebrated warriors in Renly's host. Silence followed. Renly Baratheon did not laugh. He named her to his Rainbow Guard, choosing her not as a curiosity, but as a champion. For the first time in her life, Brienne was judged not by her appearance, but by her actions. Her loyalty to Renly was immediate and absolute. Renly treated Brienne with courtesy and respect, speaking to her as an equal when others would not. He did not mock her vows or question her devotion. In him, Brienne saw the embodiment of the ideals she cherished. A lord who inspired loyalty through kindness rather than fear. Her service became more than duty. It became belief. Brienne guarded Renly with fierce vigilance. She watched crowds closely, scanned shadows, and slept lightly near his tent. The world had taught her that honour was fragile, and she would not allow it to be taken from him if she could prevent it. She failed. The night Renly died shattered something in Brienne that could never be fully repaired. She was there when the shadow came. She felt the unnatural cold. She heard Renly's final breath. The image of his body collapsing, the life leaving him in silence, burned itself into her memory. She reacted as she always did, instinctively, decisively, but there was no enemy she could strike, no blow she could block. When Catelyn Stark fled the tent, Brienne followed, sword drawn, confused and desperate. Others did not see confusion. They saw guilt. Accused of murder, Brienne was forced to flee with Catelyn into the darkness, Renly's blood still warm on the ground behind them. The camp turned hostile in moments. Knights she had defeated now sought her life. The honor she had earned evaporated instantly under suspicion and fear. As they rode through the night, Brienne felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not anger, but grief. She had failed the one person who had believed in her without reservation. In the days that followed, Brienne's world narrowed to survival and obligation. She swore herself to Catelyn Stark, not for reward, but for redemption. Catelyn believed her innocent. That belief mattered more than comfort or safety. Brienne would repay it with her life if required. The journey with Catelyn was not easy. They travelled through a realm already tearing itself apart, where banners changed allegiance overnight and mercy was considered weakness. Brienne protected Catelyn with relentless focus, enduring exhaustion and injury without complaint. Her vow was simple and absolute. When Catelyn tasked Brienne with returning Jaime Lannister to King's Landing in exchange for her daughters, Brienne accepted without hesitation. She did not question the wisdom of the plan. She did not ask whether it would succeed. A vow had been given. That was enough. Escorting Jaime Lannister tested Brienne in ways she had not anticipated. Jaime was everything she despised, or thought she did. Arrogant, cruel, dismissive of vows and honor. He mocked her relentlessly, questioning her appearance, her motivations, and her beliefs. Brienne endured it as she endured all things, refusing to rise to his taunts. But the road stripped illusions from them both. They fought side by side against danger, even as they despised one another. Brienne's strength saved Jaime more than once, though he rarely acknowledged it. Slowly, against her will, she began to see cracks in the mask he wore. Moments of honesty slipped through his arrogance. His bitterness was rooted in betrayal and misunderstanding as deep as her own wounds. Brienne did not forgive him, but she listened. Their journey ended in catastrophe when they were captured by the brave companions. Brienne was beaten, humiliated and threatened. She endured it with silent fury, her sense of self tested more brutally than ever before. When Jaime was maimed, his sword hand severed, Brienne witnessed the collapse of the identity that had defined him. She did not turn away. Brienne stayed. She protected him, not because he deserved it, but because she had sworn to do so. In Harrenhal's baths, Jaime confessed the truth of the Mad King's death, and Brienne was forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that honor was not always visible, and that vows could destroy as easily as they redeemed. That confession did not erase Jaime's crimes, but it changed how Brienne understood the world. Honor, she realized, was not a fixed shape. It bent under weight. It fractured under strain. And sometimes it was buried beneath years of silence and scorn. When Brienne finally returned Jaime to King's Landing, battered and changed, she had already crossed a line she could not uncross. The girl who believed the world could be judged cleanly was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood complexity and chose honor anyway. She had lost Renly. She had lost innocence, but she had not lost herself. And that, in a realm drowning in broken vows, made Brienne of Tarth something dangerous indeed. Brienne left King's Landing with a weight she could not name but could not set down. The city had given her no comfort, only confirmation of what she already knew. That power corrupted, that truth was malleable, and that honor was treated as a curiosity rather than a virtue. Jaime Lannister remained behind, changed, but still bound to a world of intrigue and cruelty. Brienne rode north with a single purpose and no illusions. Catelyn Stark had trusted her with a vow, and though Catelyn herself was gone, that vow did not die with her. Brienne's task was clear. Find the Stark girls and bring them to safety. It was a simple goal layered over a fractured realm. The War of the Five Kings had turned the countryside into a graveyard. Villages lay burned. Roads were dangerous. Men with swords claimed authority without legitimacy, and the innocent paid the price. Brienne rode through it all, asking questions no one wanted to answer. Many had heard of Sansa Stark. Fewer cared. Arya Stark was little more than a rumor, a wild girl glimpsed among refugees, a name passed between whispers and then forgotten. Brienne followed every lead, no matter how thin, driven by the belief that persistence itself was a form of loyalty. She was not naive. She knew the odds were poor, but a vow did not care about odds. In Maidenpool, Brienne encountered the first real resistance to her mission. Lord Randyll Tarly ruled the town with cold authority, his banners a reminder that power belonged to those willing to wield it without hesitation. Brienne presented herself honestly, declaring her purpose and her loyalty to the late Catelyn Stark. Tarly did not reward honesty. He questioned her legitimacy, her right to bear arms, and her very identity. He offered her protection only if she surrendered her sword. Brienne refused. Her refusal was not dramatic. It was quiet and absolute. Without her sword, she was no one. The weapon was not a symbol of violence to her, but of responsibility. She would not disarm herself in a world that devoured the defenseless. Tarly's contempt was open. He assigned her a squire as a mockery, a boy named Podrick Payne, timid and loyal, fresh from King's Landing, and still carrying the weight of Tyrion Lannister's shadow. Brienne accepted Podrick without comment. She did not judge him for his fear or his youth. She saw in him something she recognized, a person trying to be better in a world that rewarded cruelty. Together, they rode out into a landscape that grew darker with every league. Brienne's search took her through lands scarred by the remnants of armies long gone. She encountered refugees who spoke of horrors with empty eyes. She found shallow graves and burned septs, reminders that the war's true victims wore no sigils. Each story hardened her resolve. The Stark girls were not just symbols of a broken pact. They were children lost in chaos. When Brienne crossed paths with the Brotherhood without banners, she found something unexpected. A group of outlaws clinging to the remnants of justice. Led by Beric Dondarrion, the Brotherhood spoke of protecting the innocent, of punishing those who preyed on the weak. For a moment, Brienne allowed herself to hope. That hope did not last. The Brotherhood had changed. Death and resurrection had eroded Beric's humanity, and the arrival of Lady Stoneheart transformed the group into something colder. When Brienne was brought before Catelyn Stark's reanimated corpse, the past rose to meet her in a form she could barely comprehend. Stoneheart was not the woman Brienne had served. The warmth was gone. Mercy was gone. In its place stood vengeance, raw and unyielding. Brienne was accused of betrayal, her association with Jaime Lannister used as proof. Her oaths, once sacred, were twisted into weapons against her. Stoneheart gave her a choice: kill Jaime Lannister or die. The choice broke Brienne. Jaime was flawed, arrogant, guilty of many sins, but he wasn't the monster Stoneheart believed him to be. More importantly, Brienne had sworn to protect him. To kill him would be to destroy the core of who she was. Yet refusing meant death, not only for herself, but for Podrick, whose life hung in the balance. Brienne did what she had always done. She endured. She screamed a word she never thought she would say: sword, choosing life, choosing delay, choosing the faintest sliver of hope that she could somehow find another path. It was not victory. It was survival stained with guilt and terror. What followed was silence and uncertainty. Brienne was no longer certain whether she was living honorably or simply living. The line she had walked for so long had blurred beneath her feet. Yet even then, she did not abandon her mission. When Brienne later returned to Jaime, she did not come as an executioner. She came as a woman still carrying her vows, still clinging to the belief that redemption was possible, even when the world insisted otherwise. She told him of Sansa Stark, of a lead that might finally bring the girl to safety. Whether that lead was truth or desperation mattered less than what it represented. Brienne had not surrendered to despair. Jaime saw it. He followed her. As they rode away from the city once more, Brienne felt the weight of every choice she had made pressing down upon her. She had survived mockery, war, betrayal, and impossible demands. She had bent without breaking, compromised without surrendering completely, but the cost was mounting. Brienne of Tarth was no longer simply a night shadow or a lady's sworn sword. She was a living contradiction, a warrior who believed in mercy, a realist who clung to ideals, a woman forged by a world that refused to accept her and made stronger by that refusal. The search for the Stark girls continued, though the path ahead was darker than ever. The realm was unraveling, and the old rules no longer applied. Brienne rode forward anyway, sword in hand, because stopping was not an option. Some vows could not be fulfilled, but they could be honoured, and for Brienne of Tarth, that distinction was everything. Brienne's road grew narrower as the realm collapsed inward. Castles changed hands without ceremony. Villages emptied or burned. Lords who once ruled by law now ruled by fear, and fear spread faster than banners ever had. Brienne rode through it with Podrick beside her, each mile another reminder that the world she believed in was vanishing. Yet she refused to let it vanish completely. The promise she carried was no longer clean. It had been bent by fear beneath the gallows tree, stained by the choice forced upon her by Lady Stoneheart. Brienne did not speak of it to Podrick. She did not allow herself the comfort of confession. Instead, she turned inward, measuring every action against the woman she had been and the woman she feared she was becoming. The search for Sansa Stark took them into lands claimed by rumour rather than certainty. Every lead dissolved upon contact. A red-haired girl seen near a river, a northern child travelling with merchants, a maiden taken by bandits. Brienne followed them all, though each failure weighed heavier than the last. Persistence, once her strength, now threatened to become obsession. Podrick watched her closely. He learned quickly that Brienne did not ride for glory or coin. He saw how she shared food with the hungry, how she stood between danger and those who could not stand for themselves. She taught him by example rather than instruction, showing him that courage was not loud and that honor was often lonely. In Cracklaw Point, Brienne encountered the kind of justice she despised most: law without mercy. Lords extracted loyalty through terror, hanging men for crimes born of hunger and desperation. Brienne intervened when she could, though each intervention carried risk. She was not a knight recognized by the realm. She had no banner, no authority beyond her sword and her convictions. That sword drew attention. Men tested her, eager to prove themselves by breaking the woman who defied their expectations. Brienne met them without flourish. She fought efficiently, conserving energy, striking to disable rather than kill when possible. Each victory reinforced her reputation, though it brought her no comfort. Being feared was not the same as being respected. When word reached her of the Hound's presence near Sulpan's, Brienne felt the past stir uneasily. Sandor Clegane was tied to the Stark girls in rumour and memory. If he had one of them, then Brienne's vow might finally be within reach. She followed the trail relentlessly. Sulpan's bore the scars of violence, burned buildings, grieving survivors, and bodies left as warnings told a familiar story. Brienne gathered what information she could. Her questions met with suspicion and fear. Slowly, a picture emerged of the Hound travelling with a young girl, fierce and feral, a child who fought like a boy and cursed like a sellsword. Arya, Stark. Brienne's heart hammered with a mixture of hope and dread. She tracked them into the hills, her focus narrowing to a single point. The world fell away. There was only the vow and the chance to fulfill it. She found the Hound at the edge of a quiet stream. The confrontation was not what she expected. Sandor Clegane was wounded, feverish, and far from the monster of stories. He mocked her as others had, questioning her claim and her worth. Brienne did not respond with anger. She responded with necessity. She demanded the girl. The fight that followed was brutal and unceremonious. There was no honor in it, only survival. Steel clashed. Pain flared. Brienne was cut, thrown to the ground, and forced to rise again through sheer will. Sandor fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. Fueled by bitterness and exhaustion, Brienne fought like a woman who could not afford to fail. She endured blow after blow, drawing on every lesson learned in isolation and mockery. When she struck, it was with purpose. When she fell, she rose again. The fight ended with Sandor broken and bleeding, the stream running red around them. Brienne stood victorious and alone. Arya Stark was gone. The girl had fled during the fight, disappearing into the wild with the instinct of a survivor. Brienne searched desperately, calling out, following tracks until they vanished among rocks and trees. The silence that followed was heavier than any defeat she had known. She had been so close. Brienne returned to the Hound as he lay dying. He taunted her one last time, accusing her of chasing ideals that never survived contact with reality. She listened. She did not agree. She did not argue. She left him to his fate, believing, perhaps wrongly, that mercy sometimes meant restraint. The failure at Sulpan's cut deeply. Brienne had upheld her vows as best she could, yet the outcome was the same as it had always been. Loss. She had protected those she encountered along the way. She had fought with honor. And still, the Stark girl had slipped through her grasp. For the first time, Brienne allowed herself to question whether honor was enough. Podrick did not ask questions. He followed her quietly, sharing the burden without demanding explanation. His presence grounded her, reminding her that even failures could teach, that even broken vows did not erase intent. As winter crept closer, the road grew harsher. Supplies dwindled. Nights grew longer. Brienne's injuries healed slowly, each ache a reminder of the cost of persistence. Yet she did not turn back. When Brienne eventually returned to the crossroads where paths diverged, she understood that her journey had changed shape. The search for the Stark girls continued, but it was no longer only about fulfillment. It was about defiance, against a world that rewarded cruelty, against despair, against the slow erosion of belief. Brienne of Tarth rode on, battered and unresolved, carrying vows that the realm no longer recognized, but she could not abandon. She had come face to face with the limits of her strength and found them insufficient. So she resolved to become stronger. Not in body alone, but in understanding. If honor could not guarantee victory, then it would have to be its own reward. That belief was fragile, but it was hers, and she would not let it die, no matter how many roads ended in silence. Brienne left the Riverlands carrying a failure that no amount of steel could cut away. Arya Stark had slipped through her grasp, vanishing into a world that devoured children without remorse. The knowledge settled heavily in her chest, not as despair, but as something colder and more enduring. She had not broken her vow, not truly, yet the result was the same. The girl was lost. The promise remained unfulfilled. Still, Brienne rode on. The road taught her that failure did not end duty. It only reshaped it. Winter pressed closer with every passing week. Nights grew sharper, winds more biting. Brienne and Podrick rationed what little they had, sleeping in abandoned holds and ruined septs. Each shelter told the same story. People who had once believed walls could save them, now scattered or dead. The war had not spared faith, and it had not spared hope. Brienne began to understand that the realm she defended no longer existed. The songs of gallant knights and grateful small folk belonged to another age. What remained was a patchwork of fear, hunger, and suspicion. To survive in it required compromise, and compromise had always been Brienne's greatest enemy. They crossed paths with sellswords who mocked her vows and bandits who tested her resolve. Some encounters ended in blood. Others ended in silence, the threat of violence enough to send men backing away. Brienne did not seek these confrontations, but she did not flee them either. Her presence was a challenge in itself. A woman in armor who would not yield, who would not soften herself to make others comfortable. Word of her traveled ahead, carried by rumor and exaggeration. Some called her a knight, others called her a monster. Brienne accepted neither. She was simply what she was. When Brienne reached the outskirts of the Vale, her path narrowed again toward uncertainty. Sansa Stark remained a ghost, alive perhaps, but hidden behind layers of deception and protection. The name Elaine Stone surfaced in whispers, though few understood its significance. Brienne followed the thread as far as it would take her, only to find closed gates and polite refusals. The Vale did not welcome outsiders, and it did not welcome questions. Denied entry, Brienne was forced to reckon with the truth she had avoided. She could not fulfill every vow alone. Strength, for all its worth, had limits. There were walls no sword could breach, secrets no persistence could unravel. That realization did not break her. It tempered her. Brienne began to choose her battles more carefully. She conserved her strength, weighed risks, and learned when to wait. This was not surrender. It was adaptation. Honor did not demand recklessness. It demanded intention. Podrick changed as well. Under Brienne's quiet guidance, he learned to stand straighter, to speak with purpose, to act without hesitation when it mattered. She trained him when she could, correcting his stance, drilling him in awareness rather than aggression. Podrick did not become a warrior overnight, but he became steadier, more confident. In him, Brienne saw proof that example mattered more than instruction. Their bond deepened, forged not by sentiment, but by shared endurance. It was during this period of relative quiet that Brienne began to reflect more deeply on Jaime Lannister. She had not seen him since leaving King's Landing, but his presence lingered in her thoughts. His confession at Harrenhal had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. It had forced her to confront a truth she had resisted, that honor could be invisible, that judgment without understanding was its own form of cruelty. Brienne did not excuse Jaime's actions, but she no longer reduced him to a single name or deed. He was complicated, flawed, and painfully human. That realization troubled her, not because it challenged her beliefs, but because it expanded them. She began to see the realm through that lens, men and women shaped by circumstance, forced into choices they would never make in peace. Some embraced cruelty, others endured it. Few emerged unscarred. Brienne's commitment to honor became quieter, less rigid, but no less firm. She stopped measuring herself against an impossible standard and began measuring herself against intent. Was she protecting those who could not protect themselves? Was she acting without malice? Was she remaining true, even when truth cost her? These questions guided her where certainty once had. When winter finally settled in earnest, the roads became nearly impassable. Snow-covered tracks, erasings, signs of passage, and making pursuit futile. Brienne accepted that the search for the Stark girls could not continue as it had. She found work where she could, guarding caravans, escorting travelers, standing watch over places others had abandoned. In these moments, she found a strange peace. Without the pressure of a singular vow, Brienne was free to act in alignment with her values rather than chasing a vanishing goal. She intervened when injustice revealed itself. She defended the weak. She turned aside from cruelty whenever she encountered it. These acts did not make songs, but they mattered. And then Jaime Lannister returned to her life. When he rode into her camp, older, scarred, and quieter than she remembered, Brienne felt the past collide with the present. Jaime had come not as a captive, but as a man seeking something he could not name. He carried a sword unlike any other, a blade forged of Valyrian steel, pale as milk glass and etched with ripples of smoke. He offered it to her without ceremony. The sword was more than a weapon. It was a trust. Jaime named it Oathkeeper and placed it in her hands as if acknowledging a truth neither of them had spoken aloud. He asked her to take it and continue the search for Sansa Stark. Brienne accepted. The weight of the blade felt different from any she had held before, not heavier, but truer. It was a reminder that vows could be renewed, that purpose could be reclaimed. Jaime's trust did not absolve him, but it bound him to the ideals he had once mocked. Brienne did not thank him. She did not need to. The gesture spoke for itself. With Oathkeeper at her side and Podrick once more riding beside her, Brienne turned back toward the road. The realm was still broken. The odds were still against her, but she was no longer chasing a promise alone. The search for Sansa Stark began again, not as an act of desperation, but as a deliberate choice. Brienne of Tarth rode forward into the winter, not certain of victory, but certain of herself. And for the first time since Renly's death, that certainty felt enough. The weight of Oathkeeper changed how Brienne moved through the world. Valyrian steel did not make her stronger, but it made her steadier, as though the sword itself carried a memory of promises sworn and broken. Jaime Lannister's trust lingered in the balance of the blade, an unspoken acknowledgement that vows could still matter, even after being betrayed. Brienne rode north once more, Podrick at her side, the winter road stretching long and unforgiving ahead of them. The search for Sansa Stark resumed with renewed clarity, though Brienne no longer allowed hope to blind her. She had learned that certainty was dangerous. Persistence was safer. The road carried them through villages half buried in snow, their people hollow-eyed and wary. Food was scarce. Trust even scarcer. Brienne offered protection where she could, accepting payment only when it was freely given. Often, she refused coin altogether, taking instead shelter or information. Her presence alone was sometimes enough to deter violence. Other times, it invited it. Men challenged her more openly now. Oathkeeper drew attention. Some recognized the sword's value immediately. Others sensed its importance without understanding why. Brienne learned to keep it wrapped and hidden when possible, revealing it only when necessary. She did not fear losing it. She feared what it represented falling into unworthy hands. Their search led them back through familiar ground, the riverlands where the war's scars ran deepest. Brienne moved cautiously, aware that she was being watched even when no eyes were visible. The Brotherhood without banners haunted these lands like ghosts, their justice swift and merciless. She avoided them when she could, knowing that another encounter with Lady Stoneheart would end in blood. Podrick sensed the tension and asked few questions. He had learned that silence was sometimes protection. At an inn near the crossroads, Brienne heard a familiar name spoken with fear rather than reverence, Rorge. The man's reputation preceded him, a creature shaped by violence and indulgence, wearing cruelty like armor. He had been seen with a group of outlaws, preying on travelers and leaving nothing but corpses behind. Brienne did not hesitate. Tracking Rorge and his men was grim work. They followed trails of destruction, burned wagons, looted corpses, terrified survivors. Each sign hardened Brienne's resolve. This was not a matter of vengeance. It was a necessity. Left unchecked, men like Rorge multiplied suffering. When Brienne finally confronted them, it was not in a dramatic clash beneath banners or walls, but in a muddy clearing under a grey sky. The fight was fast and brutal. Brienne moved with practiced efficiency, Oathkeeper flashing cold and bright. Valyrian steel cut through armor and flesh alike, ending the threat decisively. There was no satisfaction in it. Brienne cleaned her blade in silence, her hand steady even as Podrick stared in awe and fear. She did not rebuke him for his reaction. She understood it. Violence, even when justified, left marks. Among Rorge's spoils, Brienne found a hound's helm, a grotesque thing fashioned to inspire terror. She recognized it instantly. The hound had worn such a helm, though this one was newer, its meaning twisted into mockery. Brienne took it with her, uncertain why, only knowing that it did not belong in the hands of monsters. The search for Sansa Stark yielded little. Each lead dissolved as it always had. The girl was protected by layers of secrecy, hidden by those who understood the value of concealment. Brienne began to suspect that finding Sansa might require not force, but patience beyond what the road allowed. As winter deepened, Brienne and Podrick found themselves drawn into smaller conflicts, disputes between villagers, threats from deserters, injustices born of desperation rather than malice. Brienne judged each situation carefully, intervening only when necessary, choosing restraint over dominance whenever possible. This balance did not go unnoticed. Some began to speak of her as a protector rather than a curiosity, not a knight, but something close enough to matter. Brienne did not encourage the reputation. She did not deny it either. If her presence made the road safer, that was enough. At night, by the fire, Brienne found herself thinking of Renly. His smile haunted her memory, unburdened by cynicism. She wondered what he would think of the woman she had become. Harder, quieter, more deliberate. She believed, perhaps desperately, that he would have approved. That belief steadied her more than any sword. She also thought of Jaime, the man he had been, and the man he was becoming blurred together in her thoughts. She did not trust him completely. Trust, she had learned, was a slow thing, but she respected his effort. Respect once earned was not easily withdrawn. Brienne's journey took her again toward the crossroads where fate had so often intervened. The inn there stood battered but unbroken, a reflection of the realm itself. It was there that Brienne made a choice that would define the rest of her path. Rather than chasing rumors endlessly, she decided to wait. Waiting was not passivity, it was strategy. Information flowed through crossroads, carried by travelers and merchants. If Sansa Stark moved, if the world shifted, it would be felt there first. Brienne took service guarding the inn, making herself useful, blending into the rhythm of survival. Days passed, then weeks. Winter slowed everything, but it did not stop it. It was there, in that uneasy stillness, that Brienne felt the past closing in. She sensed it before she saw it. The pressure of unseen eyes, the wrongness in the air. When men approached the inn at dusk, their movements were deliberate, their silence practiced. Brienne recognized the danger instantly. The Brotherhood had found her. As she reached for Oathkeeper, Brienne understood that every road she had taken led to this moment. Vows broken and renewed, choices made under threat, lives spared and lives taken. There would be no clean escape this time. Brienne stood her ground, sword in hand, ready to face whatever judgment the broken world had prepared for her. Honor, she knew now, was not about survival. It was about standing, even when standing meant everything might end. The Brotherhood did not announce themselves. They never did. They emerged from the edges of the world as though they had always been there. Shadows detaching from trees, figures appearing where moments before there had been only snow and silence. Brienne recognized the pattern instantly. She did not reach for fear. She reached for readiness. Podrick stood behind her, pale but steady. When they took her, it was swift and inevitable. There was no dramatic struggle, no futile charge against overwhelming numbers. Brienne knew better than that. She surrendered her sword only when forced, her hands bound, her movements controlled with practiced precision. Oathkeeper was taken from her grip, and the loss struck deeper than any wound. Not because she feared being without steel, but because of what that blade represented. She was led through the cold woods to a place that felt wrong even before she saw it. The hollow where Lady Stoneheart waited was quiet in a way that pressed against the ears. The Brotherhood stood in a loose ring, their faces hard, stripped of the camaraderie and rough justice they had once claimed. These were not men fighting for the realm. These were men consumed by it. Lady Stoneheart stood at the centre. Catelyn Stark's corpse was a mockery of memory. Her throat, ruined by the phrase blade, gurgled faintly as she breathed. Her eyes burned with something that was not life. The woman Brienne had served, the mother who had spoken gently, who had believed her without hesitation, was gone. What remained was judgment. Brienne was forced to her knees. Podrick was dragged forward, terror etched plainly across his face. The sight of him bound and helpless cut Brienne deeper than any accusation. Stoneheart's finger rose, pointing, condemning. Jaime Lannister. The name did not need to be spoken. It hung in the air like a verdict already decided. Stoneheart's accusation was simple and merciless. Brienne had sworn to serve Catelyn Stark. Brienne had protected Jaime Lannister. Therefore, Brienne was a traitor. Honour, twisted beyond recognition, was used as a noose. Brienne tried to speak. She tried to explain. Words failed her, choked by despair and fury. How could she explain honour to something that had been hollowed out by grief? How could she defend mercy before a creature sustained by vengeance alone? The choice was given again. Kill Jaime Lannister, or watch Podrick die. Brienne felt something inside her tear. This time there was no room for hope or delay, no sliver of possibility to cling to. The choice was absolute, and it was cruel by design. To refuse was to condemn an innocent boy. To accept was to betray a vow she had never abandoned, no matter how the world tried to strip it from her. Brienne wept openly, not for herself, but for the impossibility of the moment, for the truth that honour could be weaponized just as easily as steel, for the knowledge that doing the right thing did not always mean doing a good thing. She agreed. The word tasted like ash. The Brotherhood loosened their grip, not in mercy, but in certainty. They believed the outcome inevitable. They believed Brienne would fulfill the command as so many others had, breaking under the weight of survival. They underestimated her. Brienne did not leave that hollow as a servant of vengeance. She left as a woman carrying a lie she intended to destroy from within. When Brienne found Jaime Lannister again, it was not with hatred in her eyes, but with exhaustion. Jaime saw it immediately. The tension in her posture, the guarded way she spoke. He sensed the trap even before she explained it. She told him enough. Jaime listened without interruption. When she finished, he did not laugh or mock her. He did not accuse her of weakness. Instead, he chose to trust her fully and without reservation. He followed her into danger, knowing exactly what awaited him. That choice mattered. They rode together toward the riverlands once more, the land grey and unforgiving beneath a winter sky. Brienne said little. Every mile was an act of resistance, every breath a reminder that she was still choosing her own path, even when it curved toward death. When the Brotherhood closed around them again, the trap sprang shut. Jaime was seized. Brienne was disarmed. Lady Stoneheart emerged once more, her presence radiating cold certainty. The judgment was swift. The rope was prepared. Jaime did not beg. Brienne watched him stand beneath the noose with a calm she had not expected. In that moment, she saw the man he could have been, the man he was trying to become. The realization broke something in her and reforged it into resolve. She screamed. The sound tore from her chest, raw and furious. It was not a plea. It was defiance. It was the refusal to accept a world where honor meant nothing but blood. The Brotherhood hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Steel rang out. Chaos erupted. The exact sequence of events blurred, shouts, movement, bodies colliding in the snow. Brienne fought without Oathkeeper, without ceremony, driven by instinct and desperation. Podrick's voice cut through the din. Jaime struggled against his captors. Whether by chance, mercy, or fracture within the Brotherhood itself, the moment passed without finality. When the fighting ceased, the certainty Lady Stoneheart had wielded cracked, just enough for survival to slip through. Brienne did not look back as they escaped. They rode until exhaustion forced them to stop, breath steaming in the cold air, bodies shaking with spent adrenaline. Brienne collapsed to her knees, the weight of the past crashing down at once. Jaime knelt beside her. There were no words that could repair what had been broken. None that could justify the choices she had been forced to make. Jaime did not try. He simply stayed, bearing witness to her pain without attempting to lessen it. That mattered more than absolution. When dawn came, pale and indifferent, Brienne rose again. She always did. The ordeal had stripped her of illusions she had not even realized she still carried. Honor was not a shield. It was not protection. It was a burden willingly carried, even when it threatened to crush the bearer. Brienne understood now that her path would never be clean. She would be misunderstood. She would be judged. She would be forced into choices no oath could prepare her for. And still, she would choose to stand. Not because she believed the world would reward her, but because she could not live any other way. Brienne of Tarth rode on, scarred and unbroken, carrying honor not as a banner, but as a quiet refusal to surrender to what the world demanded she become. Brienne rode out of the Riverlands changed in ways she could not easily name. Survival had come at a cost she would never fully repay. The world had demanded that she bend, and though she had bent, she had not broken. What remained was not innocence or certainty, but something harder and quieter, a resolve that no longer relied on the promise of success. Honor, she understood now, was not a destination. It was a direction. The roads beyond the Riverlands were quieter, though no less dangerous. Winter dulled the land, burying scars beneath snow and muting the noise of war. Villages endured rather than lived. Men spoke less. Fear became practical, not panicked. Brienne and Podrick moved through this subdued world as figures out of place. Too purposeful for peace, too principled for chaos. Jaime Lannister did not ride with them for long. When they parted, it was without ceremony. No speeches, no absolution. They had shared something rare, mutual understanding without illusion, and that was enough. Jaime returned south carrying his own burdens, his own reckoning. Brienne watched him go without regret. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and now they diverged as they must. She carried Oathkeeper once more. The sword felt different in her hand now, not as a symbol of hope reclaimed, but as a reminder of responsibility sharpened by experience. Every vow tied to that blade carried weight. Every choice made with it had consequence. Brienne accepted that fully. The search for Sansa Stark continued, though Brienne no longer framed it as a quest with an end. Sansa was alive, she believed that. Somewhere beyond her reach, protected by secrecy and deception. Brienne gathered fragments of truth where she could. Rumors of a northern girl traveling under another name. whispers of a maiden in the vale with auburn hair and quiet manners. She followed those threads as far as the world allowed. Each closed gate, each polite refusal, reinforced what Brienne had learned the hard way. Some people could only be protected from a distance. Storming walls was not courage. Sometimes patience was. In the meantime, Brienne did what she had always done when certainty failed her. She made herself useful. She guarded roads and river crossings. She escorted the vulnerable when no one else would. She confronted cruelty when it revealed itself plainly. These were not heroic deeds. They were necessary ones. The realm did not notice, but individuals did. Mothers slept easier. Children lived to see another day. That was enough. Podrick grew steadier beside her, no longer the frightened boy she had first taken under her protection. He learned when to speak and when to listen, when to act and when to hold back. Brienne never called him her squire, and he never called her his knight, but the truth between them required no titles. They were companions bound by choice. Brienne's thoughts often returned to Tarth. The Sapphire Isle felt distant now, not in memory, but in meaning. She wondered how her father fared, whether the sea still crashed against the cliffs with the same relentless rhythm. She wondered if he worried for her still, or if he had learned to trust the woman she had become. She did not regret leaving. The girl who had stood at the edge of the sea had known she would never belong to the world she left behind. The woman riding through winter knew she belonged nowhere, and everywhere her sword could make a difference. There were moments of doubt. On long nights when the cold seeped into her bones and sleep came slowly, Brienne questioned whether her ideals were nothing more than stubbornness dressed as virtue. She had seen what honor cost. She had paid in blood, in loss, in impossible choices that left no one whole. And still, she could not abandon it. Because when she imagined laying down her sword, turning away from injustice, choosing comfort over conviction, she felt something worse than fear. She felt emptiness. Brienne did not believe herself exceptional. She did not believe she was chosen or destined. She believed only that someone had to stand where others would not, that someone might as well be her. The realm moved on around her. New alliances formed. Old grudges festered. Winter deepened. None of it asked her permission. None of it waited. Brienne adapted. She learned to read danger before it announced itself. She learned to de-escalate when possible and strike decisively when necessary. She learned that mercy could be a blade as sharp as any sword, and restraint a form of strength rarely acknowledged. Her reputation shifted quietly. Less mockery now, more caution. Some called her a knight, despite knowing better. Others simply stepped aside when she passed. Brienne did not correct them. Titles mattered less than outcomes. When news of distant battles reached her, she listened without being drawn in. She had seen enough war to know that rushing toward it did not always serve justice. Her duty was narrower now, but deeper. Protect who stood before you. Keep faith with yourself. Do not become what the world rewards. In time, Brienne understood that her story would never end neatly. There would be no final duel to prove her worth, no song sung in her name, no absolution granted by those who had wronged her. She would live between moments, between failures and small victories, carrying vows that the realm neither recognized nor honored, and yet those vows would endure. Brienne of Tarth was not a knight. The world had made that clear. But she embodied the meaning of knighthood more fully than most who wore its trappings. She stood when others fled. She protected without promise of reward. She chose mercy when vengeance was easier. That was her legacy, whether the realm ever acknowledged it or not. As winter pressed on and the road stretched endlessly ahead, Brienne rode forward without looking back, sword at her side, purpose unspoken but unwavering, not because she believed the world would be saved, but because she believed it was worth standing against while it burned. And so Brienne of Tarth endured, unyielding, uncelebrated, and unbroken, living proof that honor could survive even in a world determined to destroy it.